Assalamu alaikum everyone, Adnan Rashid here at Edmonton Airport. I'm heading to Toronto. I just want to request that every single one of you must subscribe to Life Haq podcast YouTube channel. A lot of amazing content is going to come up. A series on Ottomans is already there. My podcast, which I did with the brothers from Life Haq, is going to come up very soon. So watch this space and subscribe. Do not miss this opportunity to be exposed to amazing content on Islamic intellectual history and the history of Islamic dynasties and all of that. So Life Haq is your channel. Subscribe. Assalamu alaikum.
No, I'm not worried at all. I rely on God, Allah.
All right, Sheikh, assalamu alaikum. We got a very unique prop that's specially in honor of you.
Wow.
So we want to get a good. I think we gotta get a.
I need a ship with it as well.
Exploring history. This is the. We gotta get a nice picture with the Sheikh like this.
Wow.
And then we're gonna have exploring history.
So the Prime
And
Minister.
all of this was achieved within those 3 centuries in Al-Andalus. How does that happen? Even though they are not part of the faith that facilitates all this.
Yes.
So on that note, let's move to the podcast and save some information for
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Life Haq podcast. Today we have a very special guest with us and also an assistant guest as well, alhamdulillah. So we have with us today Sheikh Adnan, Rashid, which, you know, if you know how to use YouTube, then you're very familiar with the Sheikh. Especially, I got so much feedback about his, lessons on history and, how he goes into bringing all these Islamic characters and events to life that we had to have Sheikh Adnan on the podcast. And then we also have with us brother Abu Ayyub as well. And actually, prior to this podcast, the conversations alone could have filmed another podcast. So we just naturally, organically went into conversation head first. So everything you're going to see is really organic because it's just a continuation of, 3 brothers getting together and discussing Islam, Islamic history, and just being passionate about it and just going with the flow. So this podcast, we have some goals and objectives, but what you're seeing is really untapped, raw passion for Islam and Islamic history. And we have a special guest prop with us here today. And with this device, it's usually used, Sheikh, right, to look forward,
yes,
correct?
That's
and
right.
to go see something that's forward or something in the future that you're going to encounter. But you can't really do that unless you know where you came from in your history.
Exactly.
Correct?
Yes.
What do you think? Is it important for us to know our Islamic history, where we came from, and what has your personal journey been in that discovery process?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I believe history is absolutely crucial to be able to see the future in a better light. Okay. Otherwise, you're blind. If you don't have history, if you don't know your history, and if you don't know your history, you're completely blind to it. You're ignorant. And if you are ignorant, then you don't have anything to look up to, right? What we call the precedent, okay? The Quran sets a precedent of the stories of the prophets. Allah tells us, us being Muslims, we have the Quran as our guide, okay? It's the word of Allah. Allah is the one who guides us through His word. And when we read the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we see patterns, we see messages, we see glimpses into the past, right? And the reason why Allah uses the past is to teach us how to better predict the future and save yourselves from pitfalls. Okay, pitfalls that people have already gone through or fallen into in the past. So Allah tells us, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Siru fil ard, fanzuru kayfa kana aqibatul mukaththibin." Go in the land and see what happened to those who came before you, those who denied Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were very powerful, they were very intelligent, they were very educated, they had so much power that they raised monuments like the pyramids, let's say, right? People are still amazed to this day. How did they even build this, right?
Yes.
When you look at Petra, when you go to a place like Petra in Jordan, okay, you see mountains, valleys upon valleys carved with bare hands. Why do I say bare hands? Because they didn't have the drills we have today, right? You must have seen this guy, people who work, on roads. They have these powerful drills. Sometimes they're trying to break the roads, and they have these very powerful drills that crack the road. They didn't have any of that. And Allah gives us specific examples of these people. Look at these people. They achieved all of this, right? But those achievements didn't do anything for them.
Yes.
Right? They died unsuccessful because they took pride in those achievements, and that pride didn't really save them. Right? It didn't make them happier. It didn't make them more successful. It didn't make them more content, right? Because they kept going. The pharaohs they weren't stopping. Okay, one after another, each and every single pharaoh was building his own legacy by carving stones, resurrecting statues, building temples, building palaces or pyramids, eventually as tombs. Okay, they weren't stopping. They lack satisfaction for some reason. It is not the end.
Yes.
Okay. Material progress, material success, technology, advancement in creating towns, let's say, or town planning, or building roads and hospitals. These things are important. These are important outcomes of any successful civilization. But in Islam, what comes before this success is the spiritual development of humans, character building.
Yes.
Making better humans, right? You had Romans, let's say, very powerful, but were they good human beings? There were Greeks, very powerful, very intelligent, highly learned. They carved monuments, but were they moral characters? These are very important questions. We had Mongols, immensely powerful. Okay, very powerful. They carved a larger empire than the Muslims had because they beat the Muslims in terms of land acquisition, right? But were they moral human beings? So where does Islam come into this? Islam claims superiority based upon moral teachings, moral values. So with Islam came upright, moral human beings who gave the world this civilization we just discussed.
So we say the current paradigm that people buy into is that to be successful materially, you do it in spite of a moral foundation. Whereas the Islamic approach is to be successful materially is a result of morality, Islam, Iman and Ihsan. For example, you mentioned you have, say, great infrastructure, nice roads, facilities, hospitals, and so forth. So a person who comes at it from an amoral perspective, like, okay, we want to achieve this for our society because that's going to make my citizens happy, that's going to, improve my own standing, whatever. And it's to show off to the world, look how bright and powerful and everything that we are. So this is, in spite of, and if you have to do amoral things, say in other countries to, garnish the resources and to, extract the resources to make that happen, you're going to do it. Whereas from Islam, it's a result of our Islam, our Iman and Ihsan, because if I'm a ruler and I say, listen, Islam tells me to do things with ihsan. I can't have, as Umar bin al-Khattab used to think about, is there some donkey, getting tripped up in a road that because of me? I need to pave this because this is an amana.
Yes.
So it's like I'm doing these material things, providing hospitals, providing clothing, providing things as a result of my morality.
Absolutely.
Not in spite of my morality.
100%. So look, the outcome of what we call the Western Enlightenment period, okay, in the 18th century. But one of the outcomes was hedonism.
Yes.
Okay, pursuit of pleasure. How is the question? Pursuit of pleasure by following material desires, right? making yourself materialistically powerful, right? That's how you attain pleasure. In Islam, it is very different. It is pursuit of happiness by becoming a moral person, okay, through worshipping Allah. So in Islam, the focus is Allah. Why? Because Allah wants us to be moral people. And when we become moral people, by extension, as a consequence, we will become happier.
Yes.
Like the Quran states. And that happiness definitely constitutes material advancement.
You know what I gather from what you've just mentioned is that the magnificence of Islamic history seems to be nestled within not just pragmatics of learning lessons to apply them for technological development, innovation, products and so on and so forth. Yes, you can drive those things, but what you were gathering is that, or getting at, is that there is a psycho-spiritual treasure in Islamic history.
Absolutely.
If we can tap into that, perhaps we can not just be a better ummah pragmatically, but we will be a happier ummah, a more fulfilled ummah, a ummah that can be more connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, know its purpose. Because as you just described, if you pursue technology, your career, studies, without that connection, that spiritual, psycho-spiritual connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you are actually building your own shackles.
Your own destruction.
You're
Yes.
building your own prison, and you're putting yourself in that prison.
Exactly.
And what you just described in terms of the Mongols, that's what they did. They built a magnificent prison for them to live in and die in and be destroyed in.
Yes, right.
We have the roadmap, right? Because we have the sunnah of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we saw how he won over the hearts not with brutality and authority, exercising authority, but think about his greatest opponents during the time of our Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how he dealt with them and what was the consequence. He turned hearts, number one, enemies towards
Each other.
loving him.
Yeah.
Then and today, people who hated Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when they read his life, they become Muslim.
Absolutely. And even those staunchest of enemies, Aus and Khazraj,
Yes.
two tribes in Medina, they were loggerheads against each other. They recently fought a war called Bu'ath, the famous war or battle of Bu'ath, where many people were killed from both sides, and they were inhabitants of the same vicinity. They went to the Prophet to arbitrate between them, and when the Prophet came to Medina, these very staunch enemies became the strongest of friends. Their hearts were so united that together they protected the Prophet ﷺ. Look how Islam transformed these people from being staunch enemies to each other. Now they are united in one cause.
So what you're saying is that it seems that the transformation that they experienced through the deen, historically speaking, is something that just opened up their hearts and their minds to the true reality.
Yes.
And that is that, if we don't have the guidance of Islam with us, what we end up doing is being a slave to everything that we create and to our own selves.
Exactly.
But if we have Islam and we have the deen, and we can even learn from our Islamic history to see how this was done by the Sahaba and by our righteous luminaries throughout history, then it can emancipate us.
Yes.
And actually, truly, by being in the most honored state, the most honored achievement you can get is to be a slave of the one who created everything that we know in reality.
That's right.
But beyond that, it seems that this actually gives you true mastery over your own self and anything that you create, anything that these products that we have around us. Like, we have an iPhone with us, but most people, they don't possess the iPhone. The iPhone possesses them.
That's right.
And it seems that, subhanAllah, by unlocking this connection to Islamic history, which can give us a more closer, meaningful connection to our deen, it seems that this is a way for us to be emancipated from this cycle of domination that's self-inflicted from the dunya, that we invite.
Or being mesmerized or being affected by foreign influences that themselves are not very successful when we look at the grand scheme of things.
And so I almost wonder if you, Ustad Adnan, if you were, a fisherman, okay, and you have this shop and a big, huge lake is behind you, and we come to visit you, and that lake happens to be the history of Islam, okay, and we're going to go fishing. So it seems that we've been just catching the same fish every time, where we're just looking at, okay, what did Islamic history tell us about, like, inventions and things like that? What are the fish that we haven't caught yet as a Muslim ummah? What are we missing?
Absolutely amazing. That's a very good question and an important question. I think our wisdom, literature, okay, our texts on morality, for example, akhlaq, okay, was a specific genre within the civilization of Islam. There were books written by scholars of Islam on manners, how to conduct yourselves, right? Allah tells us in the Quran, إِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. The Prophet ﷺ was sent upon the best of manners. What does that mean, right? If he had the best of manners, how do we learn about his manners, right? We study him and then study those books written by scholars later on to highlight those manners in a more, how can I put it, detailed way. So there are genres like akhlaq, adab, literature, wisdom, poetry, let's say, okay? We have neglected all of that. We are so affected by Western philosophies, okay? We know all Western philosophers, thinkers, poets. Amazing, no problem, read them. There is a time to read them as well. And there's a lot of wisdom they have shared. There is a lot of good in that as well. We as Muslims, we are not bigots, okay? We don't reject, we don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. We don't believe in that kind of stuff, right? In fact, the principle, al-hikmatu dalatul mu'min, okay, that principle is very much an Islamic principle, that wisdom is the lost property of a believer. You take it from wherever you find it, right? So we study philosophers, thinkers from other civilizations, no problem. But before we do that, we need to study our own scholars, our own lost literature. It's not lost actually, it's there. It's lying, it's gathering dust, okay? It's lying around. We're not discovering it. We're not even aware of it, that it's there, right? We need thinkers today. I mean, we were having this conversation earlier that we have too many doctors, too many engineers, too many accountants, too many lawyers, because people are thinking of their stomachs. People are driven by their desire to...
The pragmatics.
Yeah, exactly, the pragmatics, or their desire to succeed in this life. And what is success to them? A good job, a good vehicle, a car, okay, and a good house, let's say, a big spacious house with a swimming pool in it, right? The question is, let's say you have achieved all of that, then what have you really achieved in life? Okay, what's so special? And the necessity for us, what do we need as humans? What do we need? We need a limited amount of food, a limited amount of clothing, a limited amount of space to live in, right? All of us, we can achieve that if we work hard enough. That's not the end. That's not the purpose of our lives. The purpose of our lives is to make this world a better place, okay, by worshipping Allah, right? So I believe Muslims are the only hope left for humanity, right? Because all other systems have been tried, tested, they are failing. Okay, if material success was to bring happiness, Sweden would have been the happiest country in the world. Japanese people wouldn't be committing suicides in jungles, in forests. So all of these problems are there because people feel empty. Their souls are empty. They're not connected to the Creator. They have lost the purpose of life, right? So all of this material success is not bringing happiness people are looking for.
I'm excited to ask you this question because, mashallah, tabarakallah, you're an expert in history. And so I want to ask you, like, out of your own almost tadabbur of Islamic history, what are some of the things that you pull out in terms of that are almost truths that are apparent if you kind of look at the whole thing as a whole, and that can benefit us in unlocking our own selves, our own path forward in our daily life today? You know, they're almost like wonder moments,
like epiphanies.
Epiphanies, you know?
From the history of Islam?
Yeah, like things that you're
or even you can do history in general, or like whatever you think would be kind of give us a more insight into understanding. When you spend time doing this, and if the brothers and sisters and myself listening to this spend time learning about Islamic history, there is something there. There is a knowledge there that cannot be extracted from, you know, your daily life.
One of the lessons I have learned, one of the most powerful lessons I have learned from my study of history is that kindness never dies. An act of kindness will never perish. It will live. Whether humanity survives or not, that act will live on. People will remember it and people will take lessons from it, and they will cherish it, they will celebrate it. I can give you some examples. For example, one of the greatest things we know about Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi is that he recovered Al-Quds for the Muslims from the Crusaders, right? But very few people know him as a person, as a human being. They know him as a general, they know him as a king, they know his history, they know his legacy. Generally speaking, people, Muslims are aware of what he did. But what was he like as a human being? Okay, his acts of kindness are documented, and they will never be forgotten. That's why he was so special as a human being. Likewise, we have another act of kindness. Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh, walking the streets of Medina and patrolling and seeing whether people are in good condition. And there was a famine going on, and he found a woman with kids, and he helped the woman. When the woman saw him, he asked the woman, "What is going on?" And she said, "My kids are hungry, and I will take Umar by the forelock on the Day of Judgment." Not knowing that she's actually speaking to Umar, the caliph, the ruler of the Muslims. And Umar said to her, "How does Umar know what's going on with you?" She said, "He's our ruler. He should know our condition." Umar runs back to Medina, brings food on his own show. I mean, he had a servant with him. He didn't let him carry that because he said, "It's my burden, I'll carry it on the Day of Judgment. So I carry it today." So he goes back, cooks the food for children himself, to an extent that his servant reports, who is the reporter of this incident, that when he was blowing into the fire, smoke was emerging from his bed, radiallahu anh, and he cooked the food and gave it to the children. And then he waited for them to have their fill, and they started to play happily, and then he departed from the family. Before he departed from the family, the woman said, "You should be our ruler, not Umar." And then he smiled and he said, "When you see Umar, speak kindly with him. Don't be harsh." And didn't tell her that I am Umar bin Khattab, the famous Umar bin Khattab, the one you've been condemning so far. So these acts of kindness, I believe, are the cream of our civilization.
And subhanAllah, it seems like when you're telling me this, it seems like you can actually extract the truths and the lessons from history. If you just even study history in general, if you have an Islamic lens on, then you'll know, okay, yeah, this was a good behavior.
Yes,
this is something that is praiseworthy. This is not something that's praiseworthy. And it helps you actually categorize things as, this is what we can take with us, this is something we can leave behind.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we do justice with people and civilizations, and we praise achievements where they are moral, where they help humanity, where people have done great things in the past. I mean, I'm a huge fan of certain people. I would say, I mean, if you teach them history, it's going to help them in life, and they will take inspiration, and their identity, their attachment to Islam and the Muslim civilization will be strengthened, and they will feel as if they are part of a greater purpose. They are part of a greater family, a greater heritage, a greater legacy, right? And you will feel proud of it. Your children will teach their children. So it is an unbroken cycle.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, Adnan Rashid here. I just want to request that every single one of you must subscribe to Life Haq podcast YouTube channel. A lot of amazing content is going to come up. A series on Ottomans is already there, so watch this space and subscribe. Do not miss this opportunity to be exposed to amazing content on Islamic intellectual history and the history of Islamic dynasties and all of that. So Life Haq is your channel. Subscribe. Assalamu alaikum.